This is
Well,
great.
and you're okay with the recording part?
Yeah, of
Okay,
course.
good. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody to Garden Chatter. Here we are again. And Patrick Ryan, your co-host today with my friend Brie Arthur, who is pretty amazing. I met her through the Garden Writers Association, which is now called Garden Com, but we all kind of say garden writers anyway. And Brie actually is a writer and has a couple books out, and we're going to definitely talk about that. And the main thing I wanted to talk about today is her cool book that I have right here, The Foodscape Revolution. So that might be even a new word for you, foodscaping. Uh, so we'll definitely get around to talking about that. But we've just been chatting a little bit about the weather. She says she's sitting there with her window open and the sunlight coming in. So we have sunlight, but the windows are not open here. So good to see you.
It's such a treat to see you. Gosh, it's been too long, but I'm glad that we have this opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you've got several contacts which we'll give out, and I'll probably post those later. But the one you use for, oh gosh, you got so many. You've got your website, you've got the foodscaping email one, you've got your Facebook, you've got Instagram, you've got Twitter, and a couple of those are Brie the Plant Lady. But did it used to be the Crazy Plant Lady, or how did
Well,
you get that
my
name?
hashtag is crazy grain lady because I'm obsessed with growing cereal grains. But I call myself the plant lady because originally my career was in ornamental plant production. And I got into growing vegetables really as a hobby, just, as a home gardener wanting to grow some of my own food. But my career was very focused on the production of perennials and trees and shrubs. And so I like for people to think of me as kind of a resource, a generalist resource for plant information. And if I don't know the answer, I'm very curious and I like to research and find the answer for people. So that's why I'm the plant lady.
Well, and partly that was kids in your neighborhood too, right? And saw you gardening and out there, and you kind of engaged them and came up with kind of your own little neighborhood program.
It's true. And it's still very active, even though they're becoming teenagers, which
Oh,
is
wow.
amazing. And like tonight, we're going to have a pumpkin carving party out in the driveway, all from pumpkins that we're harvesting here in my backyard. So, the kids got to grow them all summer and watch them. The vines have taken over everything. We're really blessed to have kind neighbors who don't mind when my plants encroach over their property borders. And so tonight we're going to take advantage of that. And instead of buying pumpkins, we're just going out to our own pumpkin patch and harvesting them.
That's awesome. Yeah, and the whole idea of foodscaping, if people don't know, is kind of working veggies and along with your ornamentals and your shrubbery and that. And where I grew up in Iowa, pretty much everything in the front of the house, the foundation planting, would be probably junipers, maybe yews. Uh, I remember crawling around and hiding in these big juniper bushes that made like a cave. We called them sticker bushes because they were poking. But that was it. And then here in Alaska, I moved here in '84 and worked at a nursery here. And pretty much everything was potentilla and mugo pines for foundation plantings. And we still see that, kind of almost a monoculture there. But you're talking about weaving in edibles in your foundation plantings.
Yeah, what I want people to recognize, and especially people who live in neighborhoods in the suburbs where you have smaller plots of land, so you may not have the opportunity to have a separate vegetable garden because your property isn't big enough or you don't have sun in the right place. And I want people to recognize that their landscape can offer them the opportunity to have both perennial flowers and permanent shrubs, But in those open areas, and I think most people will walk around and recognize you have open square footage in your foundation landscape or, in a property border. And that's an opportunity to grow an annual food crop that you like to eat and just take advantage of that square footage because you're already managing your foundation landscape. So you might as well harvest something from it as well.
Well, and you keyed on it right there. Grow something you like to eat. That's one of Ryan's rules: is grow what you like. If you're not a turnip fan, don't grow them. Grow what you like.
That's my number one thing that I say in my presentations. And it's usually the thing that people will email me about and say, I'm really glad you said that because I have a tendency to go to the garden center and buy one of everything. And, first of all, you don't get a lot of harvest when you do that. But then you probably have also picked up some things that you don't really like to cook with or that you're not used to cooking with. So I always recommend that people write down the meals that you've made for a week and then find the 4 or 5 recurring vegetables and focus on growing those things in a really meaningful way. So, most of those vegetables end up being really simple. They're not the high maintenance crops. So things like garlic and onions and potatoes, these are practical plants that can be grown, no matter where you are, you can grow these things, whether you grow them in the ground or in a container or a raised bed, it doesn't matter, but grow the food you eat all the time and try to change a habit at the grocery store as a result of the cultivation that you do in your garden.
Yeah, and you hit on the garlic thing. We've really only discovered the last few years that garlic grows well here. I call it the new rhubarb. I mean, it's that easy to grow. So we sold out our garlic, I believe, in one day this year. We bring some in,
That's
and then we
amazing.
grew a bunch too. So yeah, easy.
Nothing is better than homegrown garlic. And you can eat the foliage, the flower scapes are delicious. So it's like all parts of the plant are practical. It's not just the bulb. And like for me, I use that actually up as a plant that I do just along my edges on all of my landscape beds. And that actually helps prevent some of the in-ground animals that I have major populations of, like voles that come in and eat the roots of everything. Having those garlic bulbs along the edge keeps the voles from going into my beds. So it's like a triple reason to grow garlic,
Yeah, we've got those voles too. They're like fat little hostess Twinkies. See them running across our
Amazing.
pathways here.
Voles are so naughty and they know when you're emotionally connected to a plant, or they know if you've spent a lot of money on it. That is the plant that they will go after. Like, I used to graft a lot of Japanese maples. And, if you spend a lot of money on a grafted tree, either the deer were going to rub their antlers and break the graft, or the voles were going to eat the roots, or in your case, maybe the moose will just sit on it. But somehow the animals know when
They
you
do.
have like, you adore this plant and you're working really hard to grow it, and they're like, oh, I'll show you.
They can smell the money that you put into it, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm always like, did they see the receipt?
Yeah, we definitely have that with the moose. So, hey, so many cool things to talk about, so much fun, but why don't we go ahead and look at your PowerPoint? And I think that'll cover a lot of the things that we want to talk about and make sure we touch on some things. And I hope the picture of you with the reclining in your hammock with a Guinness, it shows up in here somewhere. 'Cause that's great. That's a
Oh,
great picture.
I don't think it is, but I have plans for a Guinness tonight and I will toast you.
Thank you. All this foodscaping that, and now gardening with grains, that's all agriculture, and that's beer too. So
It is. In fact, this week I did an event virtually, which was supposed to be live and in person, scheduled like the week that COVID kind of shut America down. It was going to be at a brewery, and I was teaming up with brewers who were explaining how to use the grains in the beer making process, and I was telling them how to grow the grains. And so we finally got to it this week, and it was so much fun. And I just can't wait. That was my whole book tour, was planning to go to breweries all over the United States to sell the book Gardening with Grains while people enjoy, their favorite brew and get inspired to grow some barley or some oats, or some wheat, whatever their favored, kind of flavor of beer is. So, it's interesting that we can do it this way, but I do look forward to having those real moments where we can all toast to one another again.
Well, that's great. And I sent you our information about our barley industry up here too. So I
Yes.
don't know if you knew that we had that. And it grows well for us. So
I did not know about your industry. I mean, I should have assumed because so much barley is grown in the Northwest, but continental Northwest and, sometimes Alaska so it escapes my radar. I mean, I'm down here in central North Carolina, zone 7, almost zone 8, for anybody who's wondering where this sunshine is coming from. And we did just have Hurricane Zeta blow through yesterday, but today we were graced with clear blue Carolina skies and really mild temperatures still. So we have a very different climate than you. And growing barley for us is something we do all winter versus I think in your industry, you have a very different time schedule, but you also have significantly longer days in the
you.
summer. So you can grow things. I have day length envy of everyone in Alaska. So
That's
it's
good.
always been my dream to live exclusively in long days, which would require hopping the equator twice a year.
Definitely. All right. Well, let's go ahead with this.
Well, okay, so everything that I talk about, from writing the Foodscape Revolution and also into Gardening with Grains, was all inspired by another GardenCom member and mentor and friend, Roz Creasy. And she's written 23 books on this subject. So for anyone who has a curiosity about how to go about doing this, I highly recommend that you look up Roz and buy all of her books. They're beautiful. They're she's such a wonderful photographer, and she just writes in a way that you really feel like she's standing there with you, guiding you through the process. So I'm really fortunate to have read her books many moons ago when I was actually a 4-H'er, and I had a similar foundation landscape in Michigan where I grew up, with junipers and taxus hedges that were always, growing taller than the windows. And it was because of Roz's book, Edible Landscaping, that I convinced my parents to let me take those shrubs out and actually start creating my own edible landscape back when I was a teenager. So I am so grateful for all that Roz has done, and to be able to continue, sharing this message with people, because it's really just about a logical allocation of your resources and the land that you have, and being able to make the most of it, and then knowing that if your life changes, you can skip a year and you haven't disrupted the infrastructure of your entire yard. And I think that's a really important consideration for people.
Yeah. And so we did snag Roz. She came up here on a family trip and she gave a talk for us. And she's got all those books, the Mexican edible landscape, the Italian edible landscape, yada, yada, yada. This goes on, and super sweet lady. We do stay in touch. So.
Oh, she's amazing.
She is.
Whenever I deal with a cantankerous homeowner association, which was actually why I wrote the Foodscape Revolution, was to help guide people like me who live in a neighborhood with restrictive covenants that tell you what you're allowed to plant where, and if you don't follow the rules, you get fined. And I wanted to be able to help people, homeowners, understand, though, you can grow some of your own food, but you do have to do it in a conscientious way. You can't just pretend you're a farmer and, rip out all your grass and don't have any trees or shrubs and all of a sudden lose interest and then you kind of created a mess. Instead follow the principles that Roz really shows in her garden. How can you even distinguish edible from ornamental when a garden looks like this? It's just perfectly woven together. And I've been so pleased to see other public gardens take this initiative, especially this year through the pandemic when the gardens were closed, but they still had staff working. And like at Chanticleer, which is a garden just outside of Philadelphia, they and 50 other public gardens teamed up with PHS, the Pennsylvania Horticulture Society, and they all started foodscaping and then harvesting everything they were growing weekly to be able to be distributed to families in need throughout the Philadelphia metro area. And I think this really shows the socioeconomic power that growing food can offer, particularly in urban areas where you have a significant population that doesn't have the time, the disposable income, the knowledge, or the space to be able to grow their own food. But for a public garden to contribute is really quite meaningful. And another great example of, a massive park, a giant, I wouldn't say that Epcot is considered a public garden, although us gardeners probably consider it that, but, an amusement park that has taken advantage of cultivating food and ornamentals together throughout all of their landscapes, not just for the purpose of being beautiful, but for harvesting to be used in the Disney parks restaurants. And I think again that shows, this exchange of being able to take greater advantage of the land that we all sort of are greenwashed by and actually get something meaningful out of it. Because at the end of the day, the one great thing that all of humanity has in common is that we eat. We may not eat the same things, but we all eat. And I like to focus on what unites us. And the idea that food is a unifier, I think, is really powerful. Now more than ever, we're living in a very divisive time, and we're stronger united. And if we focus on something that we can collectively kind of raise the bar on, like cultivating food in public spaces to help people or raise awareness of what can be grown, I think it shakes out to really influence the next generation and, make us appreciate our neighbors that much more.
Well, so many people started gardening this year that had not done so before. Up here, it was a lot of the nurseries sold out of, you could not find pots or plants or anything. Even a friend of mine who has a worm business, he says there's a nationwide shortage because so many people have gotten into that. So that's actually good news.
It's the greatest news. I mean, I guess for 30 years, the horticulture industry has been waiting for our society to be trapped at home with nothing to do but garden. I always try to find the silver lining, and the fact that so many Americans are gardening for the first time is so encouraging. And the more resources they have to be able to know how to garden successfully, I think the better we have of keeping them as gardeners. I worried initially if people would jump into it but have a failure and then lose interest. And so I hope that we see the same resurgence, next spring, especially considering that life is probably going to be kind of the same as it is now, where we won't be traveling as abundantly. And, investing in your home garden is a great, I think, a really great activity. It's a good exercise. You get out in fresh air, you have the opportunity to be creative. And when you grow food, then you get to bring it in and eat it and feel like you've actually accomplished something. And I think we all deserve to have that feeling of satisfaction as well.
And even if you're not successful, I mean, as a guy, I think that's how I learn by mistakes, things I've done wrong, like sowing too many seeds in a flat and watering them and they all washed into the corner. So the flat is full. You've done
Oh
it.
yeah. Oh
But
yeah.
that's okay. And I don't want people to get discouraged about that, because probably a good idea to keep a journal and see what you did, what went right, what went wrong, and start earlier next year. That's always a mantra here.
That is, I imagine that is so true there. I will agree. I learn way more from my failures. A lot of what I write about is sharing my failures with others in hopes that maybe they don't have to make the same mistakes as me. They can learn through me, because I don't get discouraged when I fail. That just like makes me a little more determined to figure it out. And I mean, I have failed in many different ways, even designing my home foodscape, which is drawn here on this PowerPoint. Um, I'm going into, it'll be 10 years old on January 3rd, 2021. So we actually celebrate the Foodscape's birthday, because the Foodscape is basically a family member. It's a very giving family member. And I've had a lot of crops that grew too abundantly and maybe self-sowed and became invasive. Or I was just having a conversation with Joe Lample on ornamental grasses, and I had planted hundreds of this beautiful southeastern native grass called Muhlenbergia capillaris, the pink muley grass. And I live in a really wet area. I live in a 100-year floodplain, and we get a lot of rain through the winter season here. And all that native grass died because it was too wet. And, it took that failure for me to recognize, well, the reason it does so well where I see it is it's planted on 45-degree angles, next to the highway. It's not in a boggy yard like where I live. And so, I always say it's important to draw a plan and then change it and adapt it, because that's also a really great roadmap for you to be able to learn from. And um, you know, every season's a little different, and your tastes are going to change. And if you're anything like me, year after year, you're going to keep trying to grow something that you've never grown before, and
Yeah.
and there's a learning curve.
Well, and you say in the book too, we say right plant, right place, especially with our trees that we plant here, right tree, right place, but also right plant, right time. So
Yes.
that kind of expands that thought. That was a good idea.
It definitely does. And timing is tricky. And I always recommend people, you know, take a master gardener program, or, ask extension your questions, or at least visit the extension website, or go to your local public garden, because you've got professionals there that can, guide you with your very regionally specific information, because there is no one size fits all. Like, to homogenize gardening is really to diminish its quality and its interest. And that's what makes writing very challenging, particularly writing books that are meant to be distributed, to all of North America. And what I do in North Carolina doesn't apply to people, even a few hours away, let alone, the cycle that you have in Alaska. And so tapping into your local resources is so critical. And that it brings us into some of the design basics. We talked a bit already about drawing a plan to scale, and the base of foodscaping is that it's not just food, it's a real mix, almost a 50-50 mix of trees, shrubs, perennials. Those are the things that add structure that you don't replace year after year. And of course, focusing on sunny areas, because most vegetables need sun, not dense shade. I always say, like, have you seen a lot of farmers, cultivating the forest? Typically not, so a lot of these vegetables really do require more sun. And then the advantage, that you have when you start looking at all the opportunities around in your landscape, is that you can do a better job rotating your crops. You have more square footage available for crop rotation and cover cropping, which will ultimately help reduce your monocultures. You know, monocultures are what lead us to disease and insect problems. And so the more plant families that you can represent in your landscape, the less maintenance you're going to have through the long run. And we talked about this, grow what you eat. Grow what you eat a lot of. Be really practical. You know, no matter how you do it, food requires a different level of maintenance than, you know, say a conifer that, you know, occasionally might need to be limbed up. Like vegetables require more effort. So put your effort towards the vegetables that you love to eat all the time and then grow a lot of them. Like me, where you end up with like 60 heads of broccoli at one time.
Well,
But you know, I blanched and froze them, and now we haven't been buying broccoli, and I have a new crop coming. It's always my goal to see if I can like only buy broccoli for a month or two of the year. That's my big challenge, you know, to myself to really try and extend my season. And so I like to eat broccoli.
and you
So
talked a
I
bit in
wanted to
the
show you a few pictures from here. Some beds that didn't do that well because the deer and rabbits came in, ravaged them, like this border here in the middle of my front yard. However, the pumpkins, I do have pumpkins growing there now, and we'll be harvesting from there tonight. And this is the foundation landscape that I actually, Joe Lample was here, and we planted this for an episode of Growing a Greener World. And then a few weeks later, my husband and I decided that we were going to have this concrete walkway poured. And that got done like the 1st of July. And we had to replant the entire front border that Joe and I had done as a result of this work that happened. And I just can't believe how well this bed has filled in, and it's just been full of pollinators, and the hummingbirds have left now, but all summer the hummingbirds were hanging out because of that little red Salvia coccinea, which is a wonderful annual. And the white flowered Zinnia angustifolia is another plant that I don't know if you grow these because I've never been to Alaska, but I think they would do well because they like long days and they don't necessarily require super hot temperatures to be able to flower. Whereas that castor bean, I don't know if castor beans would grow quite that size for you guys.
yeah, probably not.
That's my vole protection for the summer season. So all parts of the castor bean, which is the large purple leafed flower or purple leafed plant, all parts of that are very toxic, including the root zone. And here, that was actually self-sown. I didn't even plant that. They're annuals. They do die back with frost, but they really help put poison in the ground to help keep the voles from going into this bed and eating everything else. And then some food that's mixed into this border that you really can't see. And that's sort of the goal, you know, is to have enough ornamentals that you're dazzled by those and you don't notice that there's tomatoes and peppers and sweet potatoes and basil planted along the edge. Now that basil that I'm showing in the right side here, that's a globe basil, a spicy globe basil. And I don't use that for cooking, but I use that as an edge plant through the warm season to help deter the rabbits. Rabbits are voracious eaters here, and they don't like the smell of that basil. So just like I do the garlic through the cool season, I plant basil edges everywhere in the summer, and that helps reduce some of that problem animal browse. Here's another close-up of some of the plants in this border. Obviously coleus and a couple varieties of salvia here. That's Salvia farinaceae, which is blue, and then the coccinea is the red. And another plant that I really love that hasn't become as popular as I think it should is the Pletranthus argenteus, which is kind of the pink stem variegated leaf It's basically a ground cover, and that's also called Cuban oregano, and you can cook with it. However, I think it has a very pungent smell. I've not eaten it, but again, it works with those animals, especially for me, the rabbits. The rabbits smell it and they run to my neighbor's yard. And that's really what my goal is with the animals. Get them out of my yard and get them somewhere else. Another favorite plant that I would encourage everyone to try growing, at least, is this Kufia. This is the one called little bat face, or sometimes they call it Mickey Mouse plant. You see the red ears and then like the purple face, and actually the stamens stick out and make it look like it has a pointed nose. And this is another, it's a tender annual that likes long days. So, this would be a plant that you would put in and grow through the summer frost-free months. It's not hardy for me either. I think it's a zone 10 plant. And I do grow a lot of warm season tropicals here, including bananas and cannas and gingers and of course the castor bean. Not to make you all jealous, but there's like the one advantage of living in 1,000% humidity with like 100 days over 90 is being able to grow these things as perennials.
I do Hawaiian gingers, the kahili ginger, and elephant ears in pots, and some cannas and callas. Just I can move them into the greenhouse at the end of the season, but I like those too.
I think growing them in pots is a really good option because they'll benefit from the heat on the root zone, instead of having them planted in the ground. And I mean, another plant that I grow really well in containers is rice. And I know that it's not really a plant that most home gardeners would consider growing, but it's beautiful and it's low maintenance and it's easy. You just buy some seed. In this case, this is Black Madres, and I buy this seed from parkseed.com. And I just sow it right in the pot. It grows through the whole summer season, and now I'm harvesting the seed now. You can eat it, but I'm primarily harvesting the seed just to grow it again next year. And this is a pot with no drainage holes. So, this is just a cheap plastic pot that normally I would drill holes into, that I kept solid for the purpose of being able to grow rice, because rice really appreciates the additional saturation. So it's kind of just a fun, creative, out of the box, not your normal, edible plant that a home gardener would cultivate, but again, does really well through the frost-free months.
Your own rice paddy.
That's right. You can have your own rice paddy, and honestly, the birds will steal the seed. The birds love eating it. All the grains, you have to be really on top of your game to gather your grain seed before the birds get to it. So you don't have to worry. You don't always have to grow it for the purpose of consuming. Here's a picture of the backyard, and I'm glad I took these pictures before the hurricane, because a lot of things are wind whipped as a result of yesterday's weather. But you see, I have a lot of lawn. We have a leach field in the middle of our backyard. We do, in the pre-COVID era, we did throw a lot of big parties. We threw our annual tomato tasting that would usually have several hundred people attend, which was in our backyard. So, I do believe that lawn has a value. You can walk on it. It is permeable. But, we have the square footage of a 1/4 acre of landscape beds. And that's enough land for me to manage this way. And here's another border. This is the north border of our backyard, which is actually south and west facing. So it's full sun. Give you a context. My neighborhood used to be a tobacco field, and there were no trees here. And I still am aiming for shade. Prior to becoming a foodscaper, I specialized in broadleaf evergreens native to Asia that require shade, and I couldn't grow any of those plants in this garden when I moved here because it was a blank slate of nothing but full sun. And looking over to the backyard, which we do have a half an acre woodland swamp, it doesn't provide any shade for the garden, and it does fill with water, and it's quicksand. And I've lost several pairs of Crocs in it. So you can easily lose your shoes when you walk through quicksand. Um, but you can see a mix of conifers and ornamental shrubs and trees mixed along with herbs and different vegetables. The pumpkin you can see growing up over the greenhouse. There's now 12 pumpkins growing on top of the shade cloth on my greenhouse. So they're gonna be dealt with tonight.
Right.
And I love container gardening, and I encourage people, if you don't want to grow vegetables in the ground, you don't have to. And I love these root pouches. So for anybody that maybe doesn't want to spend money on lumber to create a raised bed, you can get these 100-gallon root pouches from a million different online suppliers. You just order online and they get delivered to your house, and you just fill them with the compost of your choice and then grow your vegetables right in those. The cool thing with these is they're actually made from recycled water bottles. So you're actually doing something really meaningful to help the environment by growing in these, and they don't break down. So you can use them season after season. I'm going to go through a little timeline for you of how these have grown out. Whoops, I should have added one more. I'm actually going to be harvesting broccoli from these probably on Sunday. So it's a good season. We do swim in a feed tank here. I've become a big fan of cheap swimming pools. We got this at Tractor Supply, and we added a pool filter and a pump, and I vacuum it, and we keep it chlorinated. And now it actually has a fountain centered in it, so it looks like a purposeful water feature for the winter season. And it's like 3 foot deep and 8 foot wide, so you can sit in it and drink a Guinness, and it's like to your shoulders, so you can cool off. But all in all, this feed tank swimming pool was about a $500 investment, and it is sunken into the ground. So in our climate here, it doesn't actually freeze. If it was above ground, we would have many more issues, but this has been a really kind of fun, again, out of the box, easy to install for a homeowner, and you don't need a permit to do it. And there's a view of some more coleus, and those are rice. That is more rice growing in pots in front of that Land Rover. Again, experimenting on when best to sow. And even here in North Carolina, my recommendation for people sowing rice seed is just before solstice. So middle of June for sowing your rice seed. And you will be amazed at how well it grows through your season. Even you in Alaska, where you get cold early, if you have it in a container, that affords you the chance to maybe bring it in and extend the season for a few weeks, or just enjoy it, for the time that you have that is frost free. But rice is beautiful and elegant, and again, I think it's a great container addition. Some other combos I recommend. I really am in love with Kufia. And if you're into bees and butterflies, Kufia is the plant for you to grow. That's the little red cigar looking plant. And this is a coleus called Alabama Sunset. And it's an older variety, but I think it's just a really dynamic combo of colors, and doesn't flower too early in the season. So it's a nice coleus.
I'm a coleus addict. I love those things. I shop for all the ones I can find. I had 20 last year, not quite as many this year, which is now, I believe, known as Plectranthus. I think they've changed the genus.
Again, I learned coleus is Solenostemon.
Right.
And I'm a little confused by the combination to Plectranthus. I think they're going to change it again, so I'm going to just stick with it.
Stay with coleus, yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
people
good
know
with
what I'm
that.
talking about when I say the word coleus. Now, I've been telling you about these pumpkins, and I know in Alaska you can grow giant pumpkins. Yeah, I've watched with envy because I am a big cucurbit lover. I love eating them. I love growing them. I like all the weird shapes and colors. But we have a lot of problems growing pumpkins here. We're a little too humid in the summer, so we get a lot of powdery mildew. We have cucurbit borers or squash borers that invade our vines and just suck the energy out. So we very seldom do we really have successful pumpkin crops here in central North Carolina. Now, pumpkins grow better in western North Carolina in the mountains. They have cooler nights, they have less humidity. But here where I'm at, we're only maybe 150 feet above sea level, and our night temperatures might only be 5 or 6 degrees cooler than our day temperatures. And so the plants don't get to shut down. They really never stop respiring. So I was whining about my issues with growing squash and pumpkins to the Florida master gardeners. And they were like, oh, well, we've got a solution. And they sent me seed of this native pumpkin to Central Florida, the Seminole pumpkin, which is very closely related to butternut squash. And it has done so incredibly well. We did a scavenger hunt last week with the neighborhood kids counting them, and I made a YouTube video. So if you want to hear a bunch of joyous squeals, you can watch 8 minutes of us identifying all the pumpkins that are dangling from the tops of trees and over the fence and all over the yard. And I probably will make a video tonight of us actually harvesting and using these for the Halloween season. But just to give you an idea, like they've taken over my clothesline. They're growing through all of my blueberries. Um, they're growing. They're the strongest growing squash I've ever seen. And another southern staple that might not be so common in Alaska, though I think you could grow it even just for its ornamental quality, is okra. And if you've never eaten okra, I think you should at least try it once. I'm not a native southerner, but I have adopted the southern diet and I love okra. And oh, I have a surprise visitor. I have my COVID kitten is here to visit.
Is that
She likes to
Cubby?
spoon.
Is that Cubby or which
So
one?
this is Ava Grace. So this
Uh-huh.
is the little baby cat that we got basically right when shutdown happened, and she has been a real joy. she's she's basically the cat of my dreams. She
Wow.
snuggles and she eats a lot, and she doesn't actually do anything for the voles, but I can pretend. Now, I do have a lot of other ornamentals and especially different native plants that are looking really good right now, and different varieties of beautyberry, the Calicarpas, especially Calicarpa americana, and of course, different hydrangeas that we grow very well. That for the first time this year got a little kiss of pink, which is a nice treat because we did get some cooler temperatures in September. Now, a plant you definitely do not grow in Alaska, but could potentially be the plant that would make you move to the south is Osmanthus fragrans. This is the tea olive. And, if anybody has a greenhouse or a conservatory, this would be a plant I'd recommend growing because it's so amazing. It smells like apricots, and every branch is adorned with these incredible, in this case, orange flowers. The straight species is a white flower, but they're just the most amazing fall fragrance. And then different salvias, which I think are likely annual for you. Do you grow salvia leucantha?
We do.
It's such a beautiful plant. It's marginally hardy here, but I still think it's worth buying every year and incorporating. And then zinnias. And for me, the zinnias, I didn't even sow any zinnias this year, but I'm lucky to have a good seed bank in my soil. And so hundreds of plants emerged without me doing anything. And they are my favorite cut flower.
I love them
I
too.
also like to float them in water. And if you've never made a floating flower arrangement, treat yourself. It's a really fun, creative way to use your plants in a totally different context. And that's what that middle picture is.
That's a happy plant, happy flower.
They are happy. They just they do what they do. And I wanted to talk a little bit about seed saving because so much of what I grow is grown from seed, and um, it's not impossible to save your own and grow it season after season. Though I buy plenty from favorite seed suppliers like Baker Creek and Southern Exposure Seed Exchange and Renee's, and well, there's so many. But when you're wanting to save seed, make sure it's totally dry and then store it in the refrigerator, not the freezer. Most of your vegetables don't need freezer for long-term storage. It's not actually part of their cycle uh, to break their germination rate. So make sure you have it in a waterproof container. This is coming from experience because seed will mold. But remember, the key for seed storage for long-term use, dry, dark, cool, and humid. And that is your refrigerator. And always label. I'm notorious for thinking that somehow I'm going to remember what type of corn that was. Guess what? 9 months later, I don't remember what kind of corn that was, And then seed sowing. This is a big generalization, but for the most part, especially for vegetables and annual flowers, this is accurate. The bigger the seed is, the deeper it needs to be put into your soil base, whether you're doing it direct seeding or into a container. And so in this example, the top seed is poppy, and poppies are really small. They're just like what you would eat on top of a bagel. They need light to germinate, so they can't be covered. Below that is barley, below that sunflowers, and then corn. And you see each seed is slightly larger than the next, and that determines the depth in which you should sow.
And you thumb them in.
Thumb them in, literally thumb them in. I can't believe how many people think I'm talking in code when I say thumb it in, but I'm being as literal as anyone has ever been. And then my favorite seed sources, here's just a handful of places that I order from. This year, because of the added interest, it's been hard to keep track of who has what because everybody has sold out. So that's another reason why, saving some of your own seed will ensure that you will have it to plant for the next year. But yeah, I get a million questions, especially on Instagram, about very specifically, where should I buy something? And I'm like, I think you should use Google. Google is there for all of us. Golly, what did I include in this? I haven't actually looked at this. I wasn't anticipating that I was going to give you a lecture on cover crops. But that was a motivation for gardening with grains. And I don't care where you live, we can all do a better job as home gardeners incorporating cover crops into our plantings. Most of the time they're used for, erosion control, and then long term to smother weeds and ultimately draw nutrients to the surface. And you want to rotate grains and legumes or plant grains and legumes simultaneously. Often I would recommend doing like peas and oats together, and they will meander together. The peas fix nitrogen. The oats have really deep root systems that draw other nutrients back up to the soil surface, and then that will feed all the other plants that you're growing around it, plus the next season of food that you would cultivate. So some legumes that you have some options in. I really love crimson clover. I think that is one of the most beautiful plants. That's the red that's in this photograph. and then some non-legumes, a lot of different cereals, and also buckwheat, which was the white in the photo here. So I love to put buckwheat and crimson clover together. It's great for pollinators while they're also, really helping improve the soil. And into some grain information, this is what you would probably be sowing. Do you do this in April or May?
Yeah, it
I mean,
certainly may. Yeah,
May, yeah, when your ground is thawed and it's warm enough. So we just direct seed everything. We don't transplant any of our grains, and we mix them with larkspur to add a benefit for pollinators and also to deter animals because larkspur is poisonous. And that's what it turns into. And, I just like to treat greens basically like an ornamental grass. And the fact that you can harvest that seed and make your own flour is a bonus. Um, and I recommend trying them in containers. It's a really beautiful plant to grow through the season as your thriller element. And for people who have never grown grains before, this is an easy way. It's contained and you can keep your eye on it. You can mix it with other plants that add interest. So it's really easy. You just fill your pot with soil, scatter your green seed on top. You can mulch it lightly. The grains germinate really quickly, usually 4 to 5 days. So you're not having to wait very long. And then, ultimately what you'll get are these, dynamic flowers that glisten in the sun and ultimately turn amber. And, you'll have people that are just curious because it's not something that you see used in this ornamental context. And I think that there's a lot of power in that.
yeah.
The shock and awe value of growing food is sometimes the most important part of it.
I grew blue wheat a couple years ago in a container. It was beautiful. I tried entering it in the state fair, but I didn't know what the specifics were. You have to have 6 stalks or something, and I had underrepresented it, but it was still fun. It was beautiful. So
I think that should be your challenge for 2021.
yeah, I'll take more blue wheat.
More blue wheat. I think that is it Botanical Interests is selling that Utric blue wheat, which is
Okay.
beautiful. So you can actually watch several episodes from season 11 on Growing a Greener World about all this that we talked about. Joe and his team came and did a foodscaping episode, and they did an episode featuring my neighbor childhood laborers who are more motivated than ever to go outside and work in the gardens. So you can visit the Growing a Greener World website and watch any episode anytime, or you can put your zip code into their website and find out when it airs on your local PBS channel.
Cool.
And you can visit my website to sign up for my newsletter, which I just had a new newsletter come out today. I only do it once a month, so I promise I won't be spamming you. And you can learn more about what I do, and I have my books available through there. And I hope that y'all will keep in touch and connect on social media. That's the easiest way to keep up to date and share the good and the bad and the ugly from our gardens and get everybody a little more excited about what they've never done and what they want to do for next year.
Yeah, it's work. It can be work, but we're good with containers too here. Sometimes that's a better choice for people. So and you can plant anything in a container and just experiment. That's fun.
And that's one giant container behind me in this picture. That is a product called the Live Screen. And it's a vertical growing system that hooks up to a timer in the hose, which you can kind of see in that photograph. And it self-irrigates, and it's hands down the best way to grow coleus. So if you haven't ever gardened vertically, I highly recommend checking out livewall.com.
Live wall. All right, you're speaking my language here.
Yeah, it's awesome. And this is just sitting in my driveway.
A couple of things we didn't get to talk about, and we may have to do this again. was the fact that, well, it's in the book. People can find that about you preserving it. You mentioned a little bit, you're preserving a lot of your things. You also have, David is the cook in the family, right? You grow it, and
Yes.
he cooks it, so that's a good relationship. I think a really important thing that we should consider is the homemade Bloody Mary that you have that wonderful recipe for. But gosh, I mean, we can
That's
go through
always
this.
the highlight of our tomato tasting. And people were really heartbroken this year when clearly we couldn't hold an event with hundreds of people. We have a mandate for anything larger than 50.
Right.
But I need the Bloody Mary.
Yeah, yeah, they look really good. And there's their tomato paste and the pizza sauce and everything. Just how fresh is that? I mean, that's awesome.
I try to keep really practical, easy to do recipes. Like you said, I'm not the chef in the house, but I still do the preserving. And so I always think like if I can do it, anybody can because it's not second nature for me. And in the grain book, we actually have 13 recipes included for how you can use the various grains that are featured. And that's, I think, it opens people's eyes to some of the gluten-free options that grains have, and just some, again, maybe not recipes that you would have ordinarily done, like cooking sorghum and making a vegan tropical salad. But it's awesome. It's delicious, and they're easy. They're not quite all 15 minutes, but I try to keep anything that I make under between 15 minutes and a half an hour.
Well, that's great. Well, Bree, thank you so much for your time and all the great information. We'll remind people that this will be on our website and it'll be accessible. Bree was kind enough to let us record this. Tons of information here. All your contact places are great. Definitely encourage the One Green World videos that you have out there. So those are great too. Joe's a super nice guy. You'll love him. And as we love Bree. So
Oh,
hey, thank you so much. I want to show your book one more time here. Pretty awesome.
well, thank you so much for inviting me. This was a pleasure to get to catch up with you. And anytime you want to do it, I am here.
I
So,
thank you so much. All right. Have a great rest of your day and weekend.
yes, and happy Halloween
Oh, yeah.
and happy Set Your Clocks Back.
Oh, that too.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Bree.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Let's
All
get
right,
there.
so you're gonna click end.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
And then